Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we have a review, sort of post follow-up video of these BLI Blueline Santa Fe F7s. So real quick, basically a few months back I made a comparison video between three HO Santa Fe F7s. I compared an Athearn Genesis F7 to a MTH F7 to a BLI Paragon 3 F7. And at the time, I didn't own this engine. I just got this thing recently. This is a Blueline, as I said, BLI Blueline engine. And I'll quickly go through, stuff about it. But basically, this video will be a follow-up of sorts. I'm not going to exactly review and go through all the details here, but basically, I'm going to compare this as a kind of post follow-up way. I'll compare this engine to the other three engines. And it's going to be a little bit confusing. So I'm going to start this off by just having, just try my best to describe what exactly is going on. So, this is the BLI Blueline engine, and this is nothing like the Paragon 3 engine. Yes, they're both made by the BLI, but it's completely new tooling, and let me explain why. So basically, this was released a long time ago. I don't have an exact date on me. I didn't do the research ahead of time, unfortunately, but this was released a whole while back, and then between this release and the Paragon 3 release, BLI made, used this tooling, this exact tooling for their Paragon, the QSI sound, and Blueline engines. And you'll realize that they didn't make F7s for the Paragon 2 line. They didn't make it for the Paragon 2, and then they re-released it for Paragon 3. And that's because the Paragon 3 engines are significantly different than the previous two releases. And that is because in between those two releases, MTH sued BLI. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty, but basically, MTH stole BLI's tooling for certain engines, including the F7s. They stole the tooling for the F7s. They stole the tooling for their GG1s, and they also took the Big Boy, I believe, and the cab forwards. That is the reason why BLI, for some inexplicable reason, stopped producing those four engines, and possibly some other ones I kind of forgot, but they stopped producing those specific engines. MTH came out of the blue and released all those engines, and then recently BLI has been remaking those engines because they're very popular. So they're recently remaking those engines, and that's why they're coming out with new versions of them, and they're more detailed and whatever. But basically, so in short, MTH took this guy, the BLI Blueline tooling, so that's why these two engines are very similar. And then a few years later, in fact, like 2 years ago, I think, BLI released the Paragon 3 version of the F7s, which again is a completely separate entity. The only thing that's similar, the only way that's similar to this engine is they're made by the same manufacturer, but they're completely different tooling-wise. They're the insides, the body, the shell, and everything like that is very different. And so, with that being said, I'm going to be comparing this to the MTH engine, which again is very similar tooling. MTH took their tooling, upgraded a few things, and released it, under their own name, including the sound and the motor and whatever. But they also changed a few other things on the shell. But basically, this thing is very similar to the MTH engine and somewhat similar to the Paragon 3 F7s. So that being said, I'm going to be comparing this engine to those engines. So yeah, let's get started. So very first thing, I had complaints. I had 2 complaints with the Paragon 3, or 3 complaints. But anyways, I had some complaints with the BLI Paragon 3 F7s, and that was the red paint was kind of faded, which, I mean, that's fine. That's not a big deal. Faded paint on diesels is pretty common. It basically means that's been in service for a while, and yeah, but it's not a big deal. But that being said, this red paint is much more, I guess, similar to the Athearn Genesis F7 paint, so it's not like a faded red. It's a much more vibrant red, which I really appreciate. And that's a good thing. The second thing is the chrome plating. So chrome plating for me is very important because when I'm trying to lash up an ABBA consist of these engines, usually I have the AB unit from one manufacturer and then an AB unit from another manufacturer combined together. And what the problem with that is, the chrome plating has to match because you're gonna have 2 B units sitting alongside each other, and if the chrome plating of one B unit is very different than the other one, it'll be very, very noticeable, and so you don't want that. So you want the chrome plating to be very similar between all your engines. And the problem with that is this chrome plating it's kind of matte, it's kind of dull. It is chrome plating technically, but it's very dull. And this is identical to the Paragon 3 chrome plating. So this engine would look great alongside the Paragon 3, BLI Paragon 3 F7s, but it would stick out like a sore thumb if you're running alongside another Genesis, MTH, or even Walther's Proto 2000 engine. All 3 of those manufacturers have very similar, very shiny chrome plating, which in my opinion looks better. But regardless, those three should not be run alongside these, the Blueline or the Paragon 3, because those have very different matte chrome plating. So that is kind of one complaint I have. It's not really a complaint, but basically you shouldn't run these alongside those other three manufacturers, because those have much glossier chrome plating. And so unfortunately this is not fixed through, by buying a Blueline version of this engine. But that's pretty much it for the BLI. If I compare it to the MTH, this has very, very similar detail. It has the oversized rivets, which I had a complaint about on the MTH ones. A very minor nitpick, but yeah, the rivets are slightly oversized, and I think there's not enough. That's definitely rivet count. I mean, that's rivet counting, but the rivets are a bit off, just like the MTH ones, again, because they're identical. It has the Phase 1 fan. So the difference between the Phase 1 and the Phase 2 F7 is that the Phase 2 has a much larger dynamic brake fan, I believe. I believe this is dynamic brakes, I'm not sure, but basically this front fan here is much larger on the Phase 2. But it does have the fan blades, the details inside and everything like that. It has the etched metal grills. It has the separately applied grab irons and all that kind of stuff. In the front here, there's windshield wipers, there's front grab irons. Again, these are all identical to the MTH models, because MTH didn't modify these details because they look good, Same thing on the other side. They also share the same round spherical porthole glass, which only the MTH ones have to. So go figure. MTH took this tooling and they didn't change it. So that's why this and MTH are the only two manufacturers with the rounded spherical dome, globe glass for the portholes. Toward the rear, there's a single air hose and a flexible diaphragm. So, and also on the top, there's these eye bolts. So it looks fine. Again, very similar to the MTH model. Toward the front here, we'll see some differences between the MTH model and this engine. So this is basically where MTH upgraded BLI's Blueline tooling. The first thing being the horns. So this horn configuration with a single chime forward and a single chime in backwards is the as-built F7 tooling, or as-built F7s. They all came like this. But then in the future, in later years, Santa Fe upgraded the horns to either have a single 3-chime horn, which basically this one was just simply removed, and this one was replaced with a 3-chime horn, or even a 5-chime horn, which would look kind of cool. But so MTH actually did modify their F7s to have this. So they did modify the BLI Blueline tooling, upgrade the BLI Blueline tooling in the horn department, I guess you could say. Another thing they did was they removed this thing right here. I believe this is some sort of early MU hose kind of technology that Santa Fe employed. This is only to my recollection, only visible on Santa Fe F7s. I don't believe other roads had this thing. But basically this little hatch here, which is present on other Genesis, it's present on the new BLI Paragon 3. It's not present on the MTH though, for some reason. So basically MTH actually removed this prototype specific detail in their F7s, which is very strange, considering why would you remove detail? Why would you make tooling that exists fine? Why would you downgrade it? Why would you do that? It doesn't make any sense. But yeah, that's just something to note. It's also missing the eye bolt here, which is again a Santa Fe prototype specific detail. This one doesn't have it. The MTH one doesn't have it, obviously, because they didn't upgrade it. The BLI Paragon 3 actually does have it, which is kind of cool, and the Genesis obviously has it too. In the front here, there's no MU hoses. In the front, there's only just a brake line, and it's missing a coupler. These engines are missing coupler boxes. That's the reason they don't have couplers right now, but I'll be sure to add them later. But for now, they're missing them. Otherwise, the details are very similar. As I said, there's grab irons, more grab irons here. There's etched metal little steps here, and this is I believe plastic brake hose or uncoupling lever. But yeah, so the front, again, it's interesting how MTH actually removed downgraded the tooling as far as I care, but it's interesting. Besides that though, the light package is very similar. MTH has the same lit up marker lights and number boards, and yeah. So now the one last thing I want to talk about before we talk about the sound is the headlights. So as you see here, this is actually the correct headlight package for Santa Fe, and that is the bottom two little bulbs are horizontally mounted. That's the headlight, and in the top there's two vertically mounted bulbs. The bottom being the Mars light, which is just a white color, and the top being an emergency light, which also has that Mars light kind of flicker, but it should be red. BLI nailed this by having all 4 bulbs present, although the very top one does not operate. only the Mars light at the bottom one and the front two operate, they light up. This is correct because, again, the emergency light, I understand why they didn't, operate it and make it work, because it's just kind of pointless. I mean, Santa Fe didn't use it that often. Genesis actually has all 4 of these lights all work separately. So the headlights, obviously those 2 work together, and then you have the Mars light, which you can operate by F5, and then the emergency light, which you could operate by F6. So Ather Genesis has all I guess 3 lights operate. MTH simplified this. They did 2 things. So first off, they removed the silver reflector thing that's behind the or in front of the lights, I guess you could say. They just had it painted red, which is very inaccurate. The silver, the little bit of silver paint that's around the lights, they didn't have that. And the second thing they did was remove the 2 bulbs in the front here and simply only replaced it with a single bulb mounted in the center. And that makes sense. I mean, the top light didn't operate anyway, so they basically just centered the Mars light. And yeah, I mean, that's not accurate to Santa Fe, but they did it, and I mean, it's not a big deal. But again, it's another thing that they downgraded, which is rather strange. So yeah, MTH basically took the bottom bulb and then removed the top one and then put it in the center, and then removed this reflective silver of the reflector of the lights. So yeah, that's another thing they downgraded. BLI, interestingly, the Paragon 3, they ignored having this set up entirely. All they did, they basically just put 3mm LEDs straight through these holes here, and that looks very unrealistic. And I hope they improve it by adding these like mini bulb detail, which is much better. I can't really explain it. You got to go to the old video to check out what I mean by that. But basically, they don't have any of this detail at all. They just put a huge light bulb in this entire circle area. So yeah, not very realistic, but again, that's BLI Paragon 3. So again, it's interesting how this old model beats the MTH and the BLI Paragon 3 models as far as the headlights go, which is a bit disappointing with those new models, which cost more, and are new, obviously, and how this old model actually beats those. Very strange. But anyways, that's just something to compare. But yeah, that's pretty much over detail, I think. The B unit's very similar. It's unpowered, very light, but it has the same, plated finish, which again on camera actually looks pretty good, but in person I can tell you it's not as glossy as the Genesis, Walther's Proto, and MTH. But yeah, very similar detail and looks great. Also missing the coupler boxes on mine though. So anyways, yeah, so that's pretty much it for detail. It's very interesting how these engines compare. In my opinion, this engine fares better than the BLI Paragon 3, and it's also slightly better detail than the MTH. If it only had the chrome plating, I would be very satisfied, but it doesn't have that, and so it kind of bothers me. But overall, though, this detail is fantastic for this engine, and definitely worth considering purchasing. They're cheaper than the others, so that's something to note. And yeah, they're solid models. So the one last thing I want to talk about is, or show you, is the sound. So we're gonna move over to the test track. But yeah, the sound, as I said, is just a DC soundboard. It's kind of a pain to control. There's not much you can program. There's no 3 horns. It's just a single default horn. And yeah, let's just see how it sounds real quick. All right, put the engine on the track. So first off, you can control, so by default, these are all on, all the lights are on. I don't know if you could turn the marker lights and number boards off. I think those are just track powered. However, the cab light is controllable, sort of. Basically, it turns on whenever it turns on when the engine's stationary, and it turns off as soon as the engine starts moving. The Mars light is controlled by F7. You can turn that off and on. And the headlight is actually on. It's really hard to see. It's on right there. It's very dim though. And obviously, so basically, once the engine starts moving, it will become brighter, and we'll see that later. But the headlight does work. As far as the sounds go, there's only 12 functions, which is, in my opinion, more than enough. A lot of the BLI, like Paragon 2 through Paragon 4, a lot of those functions are just kind of useless. I mean, like the freight sounds and lumber sounds, like those are kind of useless in my opinion. So having the 12 sound functions is more than enough for me, in my opinion. It covers all the basic sound systems, or sound, I guess, features. But yeah, so we press F9 to get her started, just like other BLI engines. If I go to speed step 1, you can see the headlight turns on. I go back in reverse. There's no rear light on this engine. So yeah, that's the headlight on dim, and then once you turn it on, when it goes faster, when it starts up, it turns on. So that is the sounds. I'm not gonna go through all the sounds, but I want to go through the major sounds. So as you saw, as you heard, the prime mover sounds actually pretty good in my opinion. I think it sounds pretty realistic. Could be better, but I think it's fine, honestly. The bell sounds pretty solid. And here's the horn. So the horn, I'm gonna tell you ahead of time, I do not like the horn. Here's how the horn sounds. The horn itself sounds fine, but the control. Let me mute this real quick. The sound of the horn is very primitive in the sense that if you spam the horn, it just sounds, I don't know, really, it gets repetitive really quickly. So if I do like a crossing sequence, this is what it sounds like. Like it's very primitive sounding. I don't know. It sounds like it just kind of loops the sound recording, which I'm not a fan of, but especially if I spam the horn, it sounds terrible. I'm gonna mute it because it's very loud, but yeah. The horn isn't the best. It gets repetitive really quickly, but I'm not using this engine as the head unit. I'm going to be using this as the trailing A unit. So it's not a big deal as long as it has a good prime mover sound. That's all that really matters to me. But the horn, I think, could be better. And there's no multiple horns to select from. It's only this one single horn. Again, it really shows how primitive this sound decoder is. But I think overall it's a pretty solid sound. It's not the worst thing, and definitely not the worst thing. And yeah, so I'm going to just run her a little bit forward and back. And the mechanism is also very quiet. It's 5-pole can motor, dual flywheels and everything. Just a standard diesel chassis. It's louder on camera because I'm not using actual track. I'm using Bachman Easy Track, which really vibrates the sounds much more than an actual layout would. Alright, well, I'm not going to play this much louder because my roommate's going to get angry, but anyways. Yeah, so overall, this engine's pretty solid, actually. I think, given the time period it was made, it's very impressive. It's better than the MTH and the BLI Paragon 3 engine, in my opinion. The light package just really hits home. I think it looks much better than the BLI. Big, ginormous LEDs that have a bluish tint to them. I think it looks much better. Yeah, so I think it's impressive, especially that those not only cost more, but also are newer. That this engine, being older and cheaper, actually looks, in my opinion, better. Granted, it doesn't have nearly as much detail. Like, it doesn't have the BLI prototype specific grab irons on the engineer side. It doesn't have the lift hooks, but overall, I think it looks great. And those are easy to upgrade, anyways. And yeah, so for the value, these are pretty solid. I would highly recommend these. I think they're really nice. The decoder, I think, could be better. You might want to swap it out for a proper decoder, like an ESC lock sound, but this is honestly fine for me. Again, this is going to be my trailing unit, so it's not important. Yeah, so I think this is a pretty solid engine. I'm probably going to keep it. I think it's really nice. And yeah, hopefully this video was helpful. It's not really a review, I guess you could say. It's more of a just casual postscript, whatever you call it. But yeah, as you guys can tell, I really like this engine. And yeah, so anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.